Okay, so here's the second half. We are looking at the idea of lawns, and we're going to use a chapter from John Green's The Anthropocene Reviewed to bring all of these things together, right? So if we're thinking about the idea of color, color symbolism in literature, specifically in The Great Gatsby, color has a lot to do with the idea of time and our perception of time. So, like a faster wavelength of color would be red, and we see the red when it is going through the prism because it's faster. Violet is going to be longer waves, right? And in the middle of the prism, in the middle of the spectrum, Roy G. Biv is the G, and that's green, right? Well, if we're thinking about the idea of time and our understanding of what success is, the amount of time that it takes to become successful is also kind of our perception of value. So let's say, for example, that I am a person who works really, really hard and I live in an area that is like upper middle class and my yard looks pretty good, right? Like I have a lawn service that comes and makes the grass green and all of those things. But next door to me is a giant mansion, and they have someone that comes and they come every other day and they trim the lawn and they weed the bushes and they, take care of all of these like beautiful, intricate plants and things like that. And their yard is absolutely gorgeous, right? And I see my lawn and I go, ooh, my lawn is not like their lawn, but I don't have the time or the money to maintain my lawn to look like their lawn. And this whole idea, if you've ever been into a neighborhood with HOAs, this whole idea of a person's front lawn being a status of wealth is actually really important to the Great Gatsby, but also to our understanding of how the natural world is perceived through the construct of the American dream. Remember, if we're talking about the idea of the tainted American dream for the Great Gatsby, the tainted American dream is that capitalism equals success, right? If you want to be pull yourself up by your bootstraps to attain the American dream and be successful, the only way that you can outwardly show that is through monetary, accumulation. You've got a lot of money, right? That's the American dream part of it. And if right now you're like, that's not true. Absolutely hold on to that for the purposes of this book. This is an argument. Feel free to argue against it. In fact, you should argue against books. That's kind of the purpose of them, a la Fahrenheit 451, right? Okay. So let's anchor this in the book, so to speak. This is, and I love the fact that this is Nick saying this incident, meaning the incident in which I had dinner with these people, was the first incident in the entire telling of the story of the Great Gatsby. Okay, so here it says. And so it happened that on a warm, windy evening, I drove over to East Egg, that's old money, to see two old friends whom I scarcely knew at all. Now, isn't that an interesting paradox? Two old friends that I scarcely knew at all. Their house was even more elaborate than I expected. A cheerful red and white Georgian colonial mansion overlooking the bay. The lawn started at the beach and ran towards the front door for a quarter of a mile, jumping over sundials. A sundial is a type of clock, by the way. Sundials and brick walls and burning gardens. Notice that the gardens are burning as in they are full of flowers, right? They're bursting with flowers. Finally, when it reached the house, drifting up the side in bright vines as though from the momentum of its run. The front was broken by a line of French windows glowing now with reflected gold. Remember, we talked about gold and the idea of corruption, and wide open to the warm, windy afternoon. And Tom Buchanan in riding clothes was standing with his legs apart on the front porch. So, this is where we talk about the idea of lawns, and we're going to pull over to John Green's Anthropocene Reviewed, specifically the chapter called Kentucky Bluegrass. All right, hang on one second. Let me share my screen. Okay.
Kentucky Bluegrass. Sometimes I like to imagine benevolent aliens visiting Earth. In my daydreams, these aliens are galactic anthropologists seeking to understand the cultures, rituals, preoccupations, and divinities of various sentient species. They would conduct careful field research, observing us. They would ask open-ended, non-judgmental questions like, what or whom is in your view worthy of sacrifice? And what should be the collective goals of humanity? I hope these alien anthropologists would like us. We are, in spite of it all, a charismatic species. In time, the aliens would come to understand almost everything about us: our ceaseless yearning, our habit of wandering, how we love the feeling of the sun's light on our skin. At last, they would have only one question remaining. We have noticed that there is a green god you keep in front of and behind your houses, and we have seen how you are devoted to the care of this ornamental plant god. You call it Kentucky bluegrass, although it is neither blue nor from Kentucky. Here is what we are wondering. Why do you worship this plant species? Why do you value it over all the other plants? Poa pratensis, as it is known to the scientific community, is ubiquitous the world over. Much of the time, when you see a soft, green expanse of lawn, you're looking, at least in part, at Kentucky bluegrass. The plant is native to Europe, Northern Asia, and parts of North Africa, but according to the Invasive Species Compendium, it is now present on every continent, including Antarctica. The typical shoot of Poa pratensis has 3 to 4 leaves shaped like little canoes, and if left unmown, it can grow to 3 feet tall and sprout blue flower heads. But it is rarely left unmown, at least not in my neighborhood, where it is illegal to allow your grass to grow more than 6 inches long. If you've ever driven through my home state of Indiana, you've seen mile after mile of cornfields. Amber waves of grain are enshrined in the song America the Beautiful. But more land and more water are devoted to the cultivation of lawn grass in the United States than to corn and wheat combined. There are around 163,000 square kilometers of lawn in the U.S., greater than the size of Ohio or the entire nation of Italy. Almost 1/3 of all residential water use in the U.S., clean, drinkable water, is dedicated to lawns. To thrive, Kentucky bluegrass often requires fertilizers and pesticides and complex irrigation systems, all of which we offer up to the plant in abundance, even though it cannot be eaten by humans or used for anything except walking and playing on. The U.S.'s most abundant and labor-intensive crop is pure, unadulterated ornamentation. One could make a case for Poa pratensis in the Anthropocene if lawn grass was uniquely good at capturing carbon dioxide, but lawn maintenance creates more carbon emissions than lawns themselves can capture. It would be vastly better from an emissions perspective to have unkept grasses or clover or ivy or really anything that doesn't need constant resource-intensive care. The word lawn didn't even exist until the 1500s. Back then, lawns referred to expanses of grass shared by communities to feed grazing livestock, as opposed to fields, which denoted land used to grow plants for human consumption. But by the 18th century in England, ornamental lawns similar to the ones we know now had emerged. Back then, lawns were maintained by handheld scythes and shears, so keeping a lawn without the help of grazing animals was a sign that you were rich enough to hire lots of gardeners, and also to own land that did nothing but look good. The ornamental lawn fad spread throughout Europe and also to the United States, where people enslaved by Thomas Jefferson maintained a closely mown lawn at Jefferson's estate, Monticello. Over time, the quality of lawns in a neighborhood began to be seen as a proxy for the quality of the neighborhood itself. In The Great Gatsby, Jay Gatsby pays for his gardeners to mow his neighbor's lawn before Daisy Buchanan visits. Or, to cite an example closer to home, when I first moved to Indianapolis in 2007, I suddenly found myself the owner of a lawn, which I struggled mightily to maintain. Although we lived on only a third of an acre, it took my little electric lawnmower and me 2 hours to cut all the grass. One Sunday afternoon, my next door neighbor interrupted me mid mow and offered me a beer. As we stood in my half mown yard, he said, "You know, when the Kaufmans lived here, this was the nicest lawn in the neighborhood." "Well," I answered after a while, "the Kaufmans don't live here anymore." It is truly staggering how much of our shared resources we devote to Kentucky bluegrass and its cousins. To minimize weeds and make our lawns as thickly monocultured as possible, Americans use 10 times more fertilizer and pesticide per acre of turf grass than is used in corn or wheat fields. To keep all the lawns in the U.S. green year-round requires, according to a NASA study, around 200 gallons of water per person per day, and almost all of the water shooting from sprinklers is treated drinking water. Grass clippings and other yard waste constitute 12% of all the material that ends up in U.S. landfills. And then there is the direct financial outlay. We spend tens of billions of dollars a year on lawn maintenance. We do get something in exchange, of course. Kentucky bluegrass provides a good surface for soccer and games of tag. Lawn grass cools the ground and offers some protection from wind and water erosion. But there are better, if less conventionally beautiful, alternatives. One could, for instance, devote a front yard to growing plants that humans can eat. I know all of this, and yet I still have a lawn. I still mow it or pay someone else to. I don't use pesticides and welcome clover and wild strawberries as part of the lawn, but still, there's a lot of Kentucky bluegrass in our yard, even though Poa pratensis has no business being in Indianapolis. It strikes me as interesting that, in contrast to proper gardening, lawn maintenance doesn't involve much physical contact with nature. You're mostly touching the machines that mow or edge the grass, not the plant matter itself. And if you've got the kind of Gatsby lawn we're all told to reach for, you can't even see the dirt beneath the thick mat of grass. And so mowing Kentucky bluegrass is an encounter with nature, but the kind where you don't get your hands dirty. I give Poa pratensis 2 stars.
Okay. So when it comes
The
to, oh,
Indianapolis
hang on, excuse
500.
me. Sorry, sir. Pardon me.
Every
Ish.
year near the
Sorry. So the other thing that I think is really interesting about this is that Gadsby's lawn and so Tom Buchanan's lawn as well are also compared to the idea of English gardens, right? And so like English gardens were these semi-private slash public things that existed long before the idea of lawns. And so people who were very well off would have small areas in their homes and behind their houses where they had full gardens and people could go out into the garden and smell flowers and like have transcendental moments because they could afford to have transcendental moments because they're not really doing anything with their time but wandering around a garden and isn't that nice, right? But those gardens, those English gardens, were back behind the house and they were supposed to be for people who had enough money to spend time contemplating nature, right? Very curated, very specialized nature, but nature nonetheless, okay? It was supposed to be like a private retreat for people living within that house, behind the house. America, they took this idea of the lawn and they basically said, this is the English garden, this is the English aristocracy, but instead of putting it behind the house where no one can see it, we're going to put it in front of the house so that everyone can see just how much money and success that we have, right? We achieve the American dream so much so that the front of our house has to be luxurious enough to have not only all of this land, not only all of this lawn that isn't necessarily nature, it's cultivated completely, and also the people who are maintaining it, meaning that, Tom Buchanan and Jay Gatsby are not getting on the lawnmower and like riding around, right? And that's also important if you consider where Nick Carraway spots Jay Gatsby for the first time. He sees Jay Gatsby when he is sitting on his own lawnmower. So remember, Nick Carraway bought this little bungalow, and it's in between these two, the Gatsby's house and Daisy's house. So it's closer to Gatsby's house, but it's on the new money side, basically. But he's kind of like he's able to see both of these houses simultaneously. So he's kind of a transition. And at the end of chapter one, and I'm going to find the exact line for it because I want to make sure that I'm referencing it appropriately. But the end of chapter one, this is chapter two. Sorry, bear with me. Okay. So at the end of chapter one, it says, uh, already it was deep summer on the roadhouse roofs and in front of the wayside garages where now red gas pumps sat out in pools of light. And when I reached my estate at West Egg, I ran the car under its shed and sat for a while on an abandoned grass roller in the yard. So it's abandoned. The lawnmower is abandoned. And we might, from that, infer that Nick's lawn is overgrown. Nick's lawn is exactly what John Green described, growing, and it's got like it's completely, overgrown and very nature-like. Maybe it's even got like the blue flowers that John Green described, right? So the fact that we have that description and the first time that he sees Jay Gatsby reaching, he's reaching for something that is ungraspable. Okay. And so we have this layering of meaning, the fact that for Nick, he is in a more natural state for his lawn, and he doesn't view it as something that's, pretentious and a way to perform wealth and all of those things. And we already heard from John Green that Gatsby has Nick's lawn mowed because he's going to meet up with Daisy, right? And so performance of wealth is not just performance of wealth as in money, cars, material objects. It's also literally within the performance of ourselves and nature and the way that we cultivate our interactions with nature. And Gatsby and Tom Buchanan are both examples of this, and the lawns are also examples of this. Okay, I'll stop it there.